All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're looking at a story from Peru that kind of flips our whole idea of justice on its head. It's about a government policy that was designed to help people, but for a lot of them, it felt like it was actually holding them back. It's a real deep dive into education, language, and power. So let's start with the big question that drives this whole thing. Imagine a government passes a law to protect a marginalized group. Sounds great, right? A clear win for justice. But what if the very community that law was supposed to help saw it as a roadblock to their kids' future? That's the paradox we're digging into today. And believe me, this isn't just a story about school reform. It's about an entire nation wrestling with its own identity, trying to figure out how to honor its indigenous roots while living in a modern, globalized world. To really get a grip on how we got here, you have to picture Peruvian education policy as this giant pendulum. And for decades, it's just been swinging back and forth. And this slide, it really frames the entire debate perfectly. On one side of the swing, you've got assimilation, this push for everyone to have a single Spanish-speaking identity. And on the other side, you've got this push for diversity and justice. For years and years, Peru's whole education system has been caught in this massive tug of war between these two ideas. Let's actually watch this pendulum in motion. In the late 60s and early 70s, it swung hard toward justice. You had civil rights movements happening all over the world, and that influenced Peru. Then, in 1975, the government made a huge, radical move. It made Quechua an official language. But that momentum, it just didn't last. By the 1980s, that pendulum was already swinging right back toward assimilation. And this quote right here, wow, it just brilliantly explains why that swing back was so forceful. The idea of teaching Quechua in all schools, even the fancy ones for the rich urban elite, was met with some serious resistance. For the country's ruling class, who pictured Peru's future as basically white, European, and Spanish-speaking, making an indigenous language official was seen as a step backward. They called it an aberration. Okay, so this brings us to the real heart of the conflict. Because while you had the elites pushing back from the top, there was a much more complicated, much more personal reaction happening on the ground, in the very communities these policies were supposed to help. Now this is the absolute crucial point. For generations, indigenous communities saw school as one thing, a path to learning Spanish. Speaking Spanish was the key. It was the key to getting a decent job, dealing with the government, and escaping poverty. The school was a tool for castellanización, for becoming Spanish-speaking. So you can imagine when the government suddenly says, hey, we're going to start teaching in Quechua, a lot of parents basically said, wait, what? Why are you taking away the one tool our children need to succeed? But here's where it gets really fascinating. This wasn't the story everywhere. That same national policy, it played out completely differently in two different indigenous regions. In the Andes, the government just imposed this top-down model that was all about language. But in the Amazon, the communities themselves took charge. They built a model from the bottom up, one that wove in local culture and knowledge, with the community as active participants. Same policy, totally different results. So, why is that pull towards assimilation always so strong, even when you have policies that are officially supposed to support diversity? Well, there's this powerful, invisible force pulling that pendulum back. It's an ideology that has shaped Peruvian society for centuries, and it's called the ideology of deficit. Okay, let's break this down because it's a big idea. The ideology of deficit is basically the underlying belief that poverty and marginalization are the fault of the people who are experiencing them. It's this assumption that there's something wrong or lacking in them, in their culture, their language, their knowledge. It completely ignores all the historical and structural reasons for inequality. And this ideology isn't just some abstract theory. It shows up in these really damaging beliefs. The idea that indigenous groups are backward, that their very existence is holding the nation back, that they're basically second-class citizens. And this leads to the real kicker for education. Its whole purpose becomes not to empower kids, but to fix them, to erase their identity and just absorb them into the dominant culture. Just think about the impact of that for a second. With that mindset, education stops being a fundamental right. It becomes, what? An active charity that you give to these deficient people? And cultural diversity, that's not a national strength you celebrate. It's a problem that you need to manage and, in the end, get rid of. But this is not where the story ends. And thank goodness for that. Because despite this incredibly powerful ideology, there is hope. And that hope is being built by teachers and communities right there on the front lines who are carving out a totally different path inside their classrooms. So how are they doing it? Well, researchers have spotted 3 key strategies. First, instead of treating local culture as worthless, they actually invite community elders into the classroom as experts. Second, instead of just making kids listen passively, they encourage them to think critically about the challenges in their own communities. And third, they adapt the curriculum to the real lives of their students, which makes education feel relevant and real. So, the crucial takeaway here is this. These small, local actions are creating a really powerful counter-narrative. They prove that true intercultural education isn't about using a native language as some temporary bridge to get to Spanish. It's about fundamentally recognizing that Indigenous cultures and languages are a source of strength and knowledge all on their own. And all of this leaves us with one last powerful question to think about. We've seen how a national policy for justice can backfire, and how a deeply rooted ideology can just stall all progress. But we've also seen how these small, local actions can create real, meaningful change. So the challenge then is, how do you take that spark of creativity from the classroom and scale it up to finally challenge a national ideology? Thanks for joining us.